You're listening to Why We Do What We Do. Welcome to Why We Do What We Do. I am your antagonistic host, Abraham.
And I am your anonymous host, Shane, which I think undid my anonymity just then, but doesn't matter, I guess.
That was called an oxymoron.
Yes, I love language.
Indeed. Welcome to our podcast. We're a psychology podcast. If you're joining us for the first time, we tackle all the psychology things. We break them down through a scientific lens, and we try to understand why we do those things. Or sometimes we talk about history or animals and all kinds of fun stuff. But if you're joining us, and it is on the day that this publishes, which just happens to be November 1st, I mean, it was scheduled that way, so it's not that much of a coincidence. But I would like to wish you all a happy National Authors Day.
Hey, that's for me. Happy me day. It doesn't specify what type of author, so it could be both of us since we've both authored things.
That's a good point. We do, yeah.
It's National Cook for Your Pets Day, which sounds so wholesome.
It does. It's also World Vegan Day, which I feel like there's multiple of those throughout the year, and I am here for it.
Yeah, I fully support that. That feels nice. It's All Saints Day as well, which for I guess people who like Boondock Saints.
That's probably what it is.
Yeah.
It is Extra Mile Day, so you finish that marathon and you have one more mile to go. Sorry.
Yeah, 27.2. It's also National Brush Day, so make sure you brush your teeth.
This one I think is a little contentious, but I actually stand by it, which is National Calzone Day. I have always liked calzones, and largely because it's, when you eat pizza, you tend to like roll it into like a sort of taco shape anyway, and a calzone's just like prepackaged taco shaped pizza, so it's good.
I mean, there's some people that were like, I will never fold my pizza. So like, you're gonna upset that demographic in our listeners.
Sorry, everyone.
But I support it too. I like calzones. Calzones are great. It's National Cinnamon Day, which is perfect for November, I feel like.
This whole week is dedicated to a few things, and one of those is Medical Surgical Nurses Week. So thank you, surgical nurses. We appreciate you and salute you.
We do. It's also National Fig Week, which is a lot of fun for people to debate whether figs are vegan or not. So on World Vegan Day, please debate that.
Yeah, that is a fun one. You'd think that they are, but actually they basically only live. You know what? Let's save this for like a mini or something. But know that it has to do with bugs that are necessary for them. It is relevant to Shane. It is Urology Nurses and Associates Week.
Yes, thank you for picking me up off the flour when I passed out after my procedure recently.
Yeah.
They were so wonderful.
Guess what that was based on the fact that we're talking about urology? Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, or not. Send your guesses in. That's fine.
Yeah, there you go. Comments.
That's even more
email,
fun.
Post somewhere. Do that. Yeah.
It's American Diabetes Month, because November also celebrates months like other months. So it should be more maybe awareness. I feel like also it makes sense that it's just American Diabetes Month and not International Diabetes Month.
Right. Yeah. Almost an American invention. Not quite, but like.
So close.
It is also Epilepsy Awareness Month. A very important one. I've definitely known several people with epilepsy, and it is that is a tough medical condition to contend with. So yes, we support you all.
Yes, absolutely. It's also Aviation History Month. So all you Amelia Earhart fanatics, this is the month to celebrate.
Indeed. Also, again, in relation to Shane, sort of, is Manatee Awareness Month. Not that Shane is a manatee, but he lives near the manatees.
I was going to say that I was.
Okay.
No, but manatees are wonderful. And if you ever get a chance to see them, this is the month to start seeing them. I live in an area where about half an hour west of me, there's a spring that they all come and they hang out in. Ooh. So you can see hundreds of manatees kind of just like hanging out with their babies and stuff. And it's a beautiful thing. I love it.
That sounds amazing, and I would love to see that. And now all of you are well prepared for if you go out to trivia tonight and one of the questions happens to be about what day, week, or month it is as far as holidays, you are fully loaded. And if that's all you wanted out of this episode, then congratulations. But if you'd like to stick around, we are going to try and keep you involved here by talking about calzones, by talking about fast cars, by talking about weather, maybe talking about politics, something like that. Just kidding. We're not doing any of that. I'm trying to bait you a little bit because we're talking about trolls.
Yes. Our favorite anonymous internet users, these people that piss us off and then run away, and then we have to deal with the aftermath of that emotional wreckage.
Indeed. And actually, I had a bit of an intro, so I kind of I subverted my own expectations here. But so let's jump into that. So first, we'll take a step back. In June 2023, as part of the Investing in America tour, as part of a press release statement thing, President Joe Biden stated that high-speed internet is no longer a luxury but a necessity, and pledged to build infrastructure to have high-speed internet to all homes in the United States by 2030.
That sounds so wholesome. Now, a significant amount of human discourse now takes place via online platforms, such as text messages, email, and social media. So maybe internet is not good for everyone.
So yeah, internet's here. It is a place where discourse takes place a lot. And I don't think that anyone really predicted with complete accuracy how conversations would change when they moved online and were separated from in-person interactions that we really evolved to have with one another.
Right. While many predicted that the boon of worldwide internet connection would spur unprecedented levels of knowledge gains and improvements in our discourse, with some going so far as to predict that this wealth of knowledge could make it impossible for anyone to lie, which is just so naive. That's cute.
That is adorably wrong.
Adorably wrong. Others predicted the internet would be a fad, and that quickly flopped, which also adorably wrong.
Yes.
And still few imagined a dark future where streamlined and simplified communication would lead to decreased social well-being. Most accurate of all three of those.
Definitely so. Yeah, everyone was a little bit right, except the person who thought lying would be impossible. They were not. They were not right. The yin had a yang, along with the expansiveness of knowledge and the ability to communicate quickly at these tremendous distances, at tremendous speeds. There grew a bizarre and dangerous group of ministers of chaos, and that is internet trolls.
Yes. So it's worth unpacking what a troll is in the context of this episode. So trolls are people who make comments deliberately to antagonize, offend, or cause trouble. And this also refers to activities that are meant to stifle others, often for financial gain. We're going to probably spend more time talking about the former and not so much the latter.
Yeah, exactly. Mostly that. Although, and you hear troll, and there's a great joke in that movie Free Guy where he's like, trolls are real? And you might be thinking of the commonly associated legendary Scandinavian cryptids that live under bridges, or are these giants that sort of live subterraneanly and come out or whatever. And they torment passersby. The term troll, as it has been applied to internet behavior, seems to have sprung into existence as early as 1992, possibly even well before that. It most likely originates from a sort of fisherman's slang or fisherman's term called trolling, which referred to the practice of dragging a line behind a boat with some amount of bait on it to try and catch something, see what would bite as it's dragging that. And so you can imagine, we'll talk about trolling as we go, but that's pretty much exactly what is happening, metaphorically speaking, online. Although the coincidental reference to these smelly, stupid, unlovable cryptids is still an apt one for the obnoxious behavior of trolls as well.
100%. Internet trolls essentially throw out provocative posts to try to lure somebody into reacting to them. Even though they might do it for a joke, what they do is they try to ultimately try to get a reaction out of people. And usually only the troll is amused by the reaction from others. If you really want to see a lot of examples on this, Reddit is a really great place for that. If you see people who are downvoted to hell, that's because they are people who have probably, commented in some troll faction and they get a lot of reactions to it. And they're probably laughing about how much they get downvoted.
Yeah, YouTube comments are notoriously a place where trolls like to live. Often social media posts and groups and all of that, people will infiltrate and do their trolling. Those are common places you'll find troll. Where there's blood in the water, you'll find sharks. Where there's feces in the water, it's because a troll has been there.
Yeah, absolutely.
They love doing that sort of thing. Now, before social media, trolls mostly made their homes in sort of online forums and chat rooms, sometimes only in the few comment sections if and where those existed. And I was kind of thinking about this, I don't know if you ever used this. Do you remember AOL Messenger and MSN Messenger and those sorts of things where all you needed was a username and you could reach out to actually anyone. If you had their username, you could message them directly. They could still block you.
Right.
But that was you'd have this little web client that it almost looked like if you took like Facebook chat and made it its own separate entity on your screen, it was like that basically.
Yeah.
And anyone could just show up all of a sudden in your feed unless you had blocked them. And yeah, that was a wild time in the internet. And then like the primary way that you'd interact with people besides those messengers is you'd go to these forums where people would just type back and forth to each other.
Mm-hmm. Yes. For clarity's sake, I imagine that most of our listeners probably fall in that demographic where they know what an AOL chat room is.
Fair enough. That's a good point.
But for those folks that haven't, I mean, like I've tried to explain what AIM is to my daughter, and she's just like, "You mean text messaging?" And I was like, "Kind of, but not really like that. Like it's similar, but also like you could put in a away message that was your favorite Death Cab for Cutie lyric,
sure,
and you can make somebody guess whether or not it was about them or not." You know, and that was the invention of Vaguebook, which is really fun.
So, yeah, different time for sure. But because of that, it did definitely facilitate the ability to sort of pop into areas where you could post antagonistic things quickly, get in and out of there, or you could linger around and just kind of ruffle people up for a while.
Uh-huh.
That is a thing that people did. Definitely experience I had with a few places online.
Oh,
so
me too, for sure.
Yeah.
For the folks that we're talking about, it's quote unquote fun for them, right?
Right.
This deliberately antagonistic behavior is not new to human beings. Like it didn't show up in the internet. People were not like, you know, always nice and kind to each other
right
before the internet showed up. So it's not Al Gore's fault that this antagonistic behavior has showed up by, you know, the inventor of the internet, if you all didn't know that. People have likely been finding ways and reasons to get a rise out of one another for as long as language has been around. And we're going to share a couple examples of that too.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, you can imagine we don't have record of all of the things people have ever done throughout history to kind of prank one another and push each other's buttons. But a couple of sort of standout, more trolley-like things that we can talk about. It took different forms before you had internet. So sometimes trolls would harass wealthy businessmen into falling for stupid pranks, where they'd actually meet with them face to face and they'd sort of trick them into doing something. In the 1950s, two friends, Jim Coyle and Mal Sharp, would go into businesses and they would tape record as they started with these sort of small transactions that were legitimate, or seemed like legitimate transactions, and they gradually sort of expanded them into absurdity. So, for example, they went into a print shop and they were going to order some print for this shop to do, and they kept on expanding it until they got to the point where they were asking the proprietor to print on the roof of a house before the owner was so fed up with them that he kicked him out. And also one time they nearly convinced a Navy SEAL to rob a bank. I think it was meant to be with them, but just examples of like ways that they sort of were trolling, just trying to get people to, it was like pranks, but they were just trying to get people to do stupid things.
Right. And they were kind of upping the ante to also, it sounds like, to like irritate them.
Yeah.
Like they would probably stop once they realize this is the threshold. Like, you know, right. I can get you to print on the side of a house, but on a roof, that is too much. That's kind of funny, though, to think about, like, you know, to put that order in. I mean, that in itself is funny. It's obviously not funny that like people were upset about that or is a waste of time. You know, I mean, that's on the other side of that as a business owner. It's probably pretty frustrating.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes trolls were making performative satire that catches a lot of attention. So Alan Abel was able to get on the Today Show as a representative of a fake organization called the Society for Indecency to Naked Animals, which had the goal of clothing every animal on the planet.
Yeah, it's a pretty good one. And like they had flyers like pictures of horses wearing shorts, horse shorts, and like that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And this one was deliberately meant to make fun of this sort of, I don't know, I guess this culture around things like decency and propriety and, you know, that sort of thing. So I do get that.
Yeah.
Similarly, some trolls try to draw attention to causes that they care about by pretending to be the enemy of that cause. So, for example, Joe Orton authored pieces to create platforms in support of LGBT issues in the 1960s, obviously just called gay back then. They didn't have the whole acronym. He belonged to that community and he would write plays and pieces and books and things of that nature that were meant to elevate voices of that community. And then after he did that, under just dozens of pseudonyms, he would write inflammatory criticisms of his own work that he would submit to major outlets as someone else. He would write to like a newspaper or an editor or even, you know, radio show, and he'd just criticize the life out of his own work. And it's presumably what he was doing was by creating a sort of buzz around this because of the criticism and controversy, he was drumming up attention for people to then go check it out, buy his book, see his play, etc.
Right.
He sort of believed in his issue, but was making it, he was sort of trolling people to get them to sort of pay attention to what he was talking about.
We're going to talk about kind of trolls for good later. But as we kind of explore all this and kind of talk about this, it is worth mentioning that there is another kind of troll, and that is advertisers.
Okay, we're back. Let's talk about how to be and how not to be a troll. So this is sort of looking out for trolling behavior online, because we've described, as we said, the point of a troll or the activity of a troll is almost certainly, and under most circumstances, to simply antagonize people. And as we've also alluded to, that can be somewhat complex, which we'll get into that. But today, trolls are recognizable by their largely bad faith interactions with people online, and so you can recognize trolling because it includes, but is not limited to, this whole list of things we're going to read through. This is a incomplete list of trolling behaviors. There is responding to people in a purely critical and negative way, asking the same question several times using slightly different language, and ignoring other people while just posting continuously about whatever they're posting about and just not reacting to other people's reactions to them.
Right. You might also find that trolls will use dismissive and condescending language. They'll use logical fallacies in their argument, or you'll see sometimes like whataboutisms within that too that have nothing to do with the arguments.
Absolutely.
You'll see posting using insulting and inflammatory language, and you'll also see folks ignoring FAQs and asking questions about the information in the FAQs, which just seems like just super irritable. Like irritating on my end, yeah.
Yeah, that is definitely the point. They'll also often post random, unrelated GIFs or GIFs, depending on what side of that argument you're on, and memes. They'll also post off-topic remarks in specific, like topic-specific spaces. So if someone's talking about like Harry Potter, they might comment and be posting all about One Piece or something, whatever. Sure. Let's go with what's popular right now. They'll also bring back, so again, going back to the antagonistic thing, they might like go through an old conversation and try and resurrect and bring back old previously controversial topics that were in that forum conversation or message thread to sort of re-establish the controversy that was once there.
Right, absolutely. They'll also change tactics and misdirect when confronted. So like when they get called out or something like that, they will change right away to something else that will just be equally as irritating. And they'll try to get attention by any means possible. And that's what we talked about is like, name calling, which name calling is pretty blunt, but a lot of times they'll be a little bit more subtle and they'll just try to like kind of poke and prod until somebody reacts a certain way.
Yeah. Feigning ignorance is a very common one. Like someone might post about their favorite pizza topping, and then they'll say, "What's pizza?" And post other non sequiturs, like just trying to get a rise.
Well, what's your definition of pizza?
Yeah, exactly. So many and maybe most trolls know that they're being trolls, but actually anyone can be a troll and sometimes not even recognize their behavior as being trolling. I'll say for myself, like in reading through these and understanding this, I have been trolly at points in my life. I definitely try to avoid ever doing this, but you can sort of imagine how, given the circumstance where you see someone who you're upset about their message, or you don't like what they're saying, or you just don't like this group of people, maybe personally, and then sort of trying to be like, I want to ruffle some feathers in here. I'm going to go in and I'm just going to try and stir the pot because I don't like what's happening over here.
Sure.
Or, I have some personal vendetta against someone who's in this group or something of that nature. And so you can kind of imagine what sort of leads to that kind of behavior. I really try to not do this ever. And I think I'm very successful because it's pretty easy to not be a troll.
Yeah.
But I think at points in my life when I was, a little more hot-headed, I was more likely to troll people if I was pissed off by them for some imagined or perceived or even real offense.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the same way. Like, I really try to avoid. Like, I tend to be a pretty sarcastic person as a general rule.
Right.
Like, that's just like,
Sure.
like when anybody ever talks to me, like, I very rarely take anything seriously, and I am pretty sarcastic. But what I have learned is like on the internet, where like people are more anonymous, or you can kind of like be a keyboard warrior. Like, I have found that my emotional response will be to be trolly to somebody who's just being a jerk. Like, I'll respond to them and try to get them pissed off because they're pissing other people off. But what I have found is like it rarely makes me feel any better about it. Like, it causes me stress because then I'm like, now I've actively caught myself into a conflict that I did not want to be in the first place. So what I've learned is like trolling for me never feels good.
Yeah.
In that space. Like, it's like kind of like welcoming conflict, and I'm not a confrontational person on that front, you know?
Yeah, exactly. I completely agree. Yeah, it's like it feels gross. It feels wrong. It feels unpleasant. It's not a place I generally find myself wanting to be, and I actually have a hard time imagining most people walk away from that feeling really good about it, except in and where they find a community of people who reward that kind of behavior, and we will talk a little bit more about that in a bit.
Yes.
One of the important things to understand here is just the key ingredient in trolling. The primary motive in a lot of these is to disrupt conversation.
Right.
And so we sort of talked about sort of how to recognize trolling, but so we'll elaborate on that a little bit more. So to disrupt conversation, you, as we mentioned, a very common tactic is to just post off-topic messages to do in several areas. Oftentimes they'll just copy paste the same message in different places because it doesn't matter what the topic is supposed to be. They'll just be posting the same thing. That's annoying. It's likely to get someone to call them out. And again, the whole point then is they get a reaction from it, and then the troll is happy. Like they're just towing the bait behind the boat, trying to get people to bite at the bait. And then whenever someone bites, then it's a victory for them.
Right. Going back to the fisherman description of what trolling is, right?
Yeah, exactly.
When they do bite, that's exactly what they're trying to do. They may also appear to be posting a question in earnest, but actually using it as a jumping off point to get people engaged and then foment doubt. This might be posting questions to a video about the science of climate change, appearing to engage in thoughtful inquiry, and when it's really meant to confuse, obfuscate, and break down the conversation into meaningless sidebars and rants. So it might start off as like seeming genuine and really turn into kind of like snowball. And you go, you can see it kind of happen when it does. You go, oh, okay, I see where you're going. Where this conversation, you kind of have to stop it right there. We're gonna go ahead and end this conversation at this moment. You know,
right? Yeah. You also see, just as we mentioned, they just go in guns blazing. It's just throw inflammatory, insulting statements and language around, particularly to a group of supporting people, such as if you were to go post to a bunch of Trump supporters about how much Trump sucks, or go post to a bunch of Biden supporters how much Biden sucks, or do both of those things, because again, a troll often has no allegiance. They're just trying to stir the pot. That would be a thing that they often do, is just find those spaces where they can antagonize people very easily because they're already primed for it.
And you'll see some folks will use multiple logins with different names to support one another's posts, or even work with other trolls to do this. I saw this happen with a kid that I grew up with who recently got arrested for a hate crime, and he was posting under different kind of neo-Nazi names that he had created and was like supporting and liking his stuff under like Jewish Coalition posts and stuff like that.
Right.
You could see it was very clearly him supporting himself in this space.
Yeah.
It was really frustrating to watch, and then Facebook wouldn't do anything about it.
The whole idea is it sort of makes the trolls' posts look more credible because it's getting support from another person's posting, which happens to be the same person. They might actually recruit someone different, but they can also very easily do it themselves. And your example is a really good one.
Right.
And I think like the other thing too is if they were like a troll technique might be to someone who goes and posts about like climate change denial, then they log in with a different account and they post as a person who supports climate change saying like, oh, you know, you're making some really good arguments. I'm not sure how to even argue against that.
Yeah, exactly.
It looks like discourse is happening, but it's not. They're just, you know, being pot stirrers, as they say.
Right.
And another thing that they might do is they might go and just try and pit two communities against each other. They might already have some kind of beef between each other, but they also might just try and create drama just for the sake of creating drama. And I've definitely known some people who like to do that.
Right. And then in online gaming communities, people will troll others by joining groups and turning against their team, sabotaging missions, or just running around hurling insults at other players. My brother was this person for a long time. My dad refuses to play video games with my brother because of this exact thing. Like, my dad used to have this, like, NASCAR racing game, and my brother would be like, yeah, I'll race with you. And then they would start the race, and my brother would immediately turn around and go the wrong way and wreck all the cars on the track. And my dad was like, I'm not playing anymore. Like, it was, my brother would absolutely do that because it would get my dad all riled up.
I definitely ran into a lot of these. I'm dating myself right now, but back when, like, the early Halo games were coming out with their online player modes, because, like, the first one didn't have that, but, like, 2 and 3, I think everything after 1 did. And I'd play in these online forums, and there was a lot of people who, like, their only job was to go in and just make the game miserable for other people. And I always really enjoyed the game, so I found that very frustrating. So I was never a troll on games like that.
Right.
I might often not be as good as the other players, but I was not doing it on purpose. I just wasn't as good as they were.
I just wasn't as good. That's all.
Exactly. Okay. If you are currently using some of those strategies, you are being a troll. Talk to your doctor about making better life choices. Also, get a doctor and probably a therapist and probably a life and probably like a partner who likes you.
Yeah. Maybe some friends.
Yeah, exactly. Some real friends who are like you see face to face and you share values with maybe.
What do they say now? What do the kids say? Go touch grass. Go do that. Like, go touch grass. That'll make you feel better.
Is that what they say?
That's like a thing now. Like, it's basically, instead of saying like, go outside, like they just say, go touch grass.
Okay.
And that's probably outdated by now. Like, because I am 37 years old. So like, I have no idea what kids say anymore. I still think that people say no cap.
Yeah. If they came up with that yesterday, it's outdated.
Yeah. So if it's not clear to you by now, trolling almost necessitates hiding behind anonymity, obfuscating or outright lying about your identity, and just kind of jumping in and stirring the pot. And a lot of times trolls will just jump in, stir the pot, and then leave, and then let people kind of argue in the comments and just kind of watch that unfold. Like they'll maybe only post 1 or 2 comments and never come back to that.
This ability to wear the screen and a username as a mask, a concealant, if you will, allows them to run around sort of stirring up controversy and riling people up. And they, in doing so, also avoid any kind of responsibility or adverse consequences for their actions. And that's kind of the whole point, is the fact that they get to get away with it, if you will, and not ever have to face any real issues. Although there have been cases where they were facing real issues, which will come up in a moment here.
Right. So trolls sometimes confusingly fight in earnest to protect their trolling behavior by citing free speech and will retreat to online cesspools that specifically welcome trolls, where trolls they might brag about their exploits and even compete with one another to see how quickly they can get banned or how long they can troll a community before getting banned. So like sometimes they'll just go just to kind of get that badge of honor of being banned from certain forums or from certain platforms.
Yeah, and when trolls are banned from spaces, again, going back to this free speech thing, they might protest that their speech is being violated, their free speech is being abused, and they don't get to have free speech. But this, of course, ignores the fact that moderators have the freedom and the right to expel people from their spaces, and they often have specific policies around this.
Right.
So if you're saying that you have the right to take away the right of moderators to do this, that would actually be a violation of their free speech. Also, by the way, and we talked about this, I think, in our freedom episode.
Yes.
The idea of free speech is something that is guaranteed by the United States government with respect to freedom from prosecution by the government and law enforcement for engaging in free speech activities. So it's a nonsense claim to use in an internet forum that is usually privately run by some group of people who get to make whatever decisions they want about how that platform operates. So you do not have protected speech everywhere in the United States. You only have it with respect to government things. And even then, it is not 100% protected because like hate speech is not considered protected by free speech laws. So
exactly.
As a thing.
You have a right to offend to some degree. You don't have a right to incite riots. You don't have a right to like hate speech and stuff like that. So like people forget that like freedom of speech is still limited.
Yeah, and there's like libel and slander laws that prevent you from destroying people's lives by saying whatever you want to, and those are there for a good reason. So I think the whole notion of trying to claim free speech is by itself kind of a trolley thing to do.
Yeah.
So anyway,
yeah,
we should probably pause for a moment and let the advertisers have their way with our episode, and hopefully they're gentle. We'll be right back.
And we're back. So we just talked about free speech. Advertisers had their free speech on our platform. So, you know,
sure,
we gave them that good grace and we assumed that they probably promoted something nice, but probably didn't. But this idea of free speech, and this is kind of what we want to talk about where this goes wrong, especially in the trolling world. You might start to see that this can quickly escalate from simply being provocative into a full-on crime. So for instance, in Washington State, someone posted to Craigslist that they were getting rid of all of their possessions and people were welcome to come to their home and take whatever they wanted. But the person did not actually live in that home and did not speak for the owner, and the house ended up getting involuntarily looted by a ton of people. That is not protected by free speech.
Yes. Also, extraordinarily illegal. Like,
yes,
you don't just get to do that sort of thing.
Right.
And this is one of those instances where the person who did this ended up getting caught by police because, again, this moved into the territory of criminal behavior very rapidly. Another type is cyberbullying. This is trolling that involves harassing someone online, often in the form of posting insulting or defamatory things about them, but it can also extend into some pretty I would consider egregious violations by posting their private information, such as their address, email, credit cards, names that they might use, names of people that they care about, like a lot of like very nasty stuff that should not be made publicly available.
Doxing is not protected by free speech.
Yeah.
I mean, that's essentially that's important to know. But something that we do want to unpack, because we've been kind of talking about the dark side of trolling and like what that looks like. It's definitely worth unpacking what we are describing as the kind-hearted troll. So the other side of trolling, it's not all disruption, and not all disruption is necessarily bad. Sometimes on the internet, people will call themselves disruptors for good.
Yeah.
I've heard that a couple times. Disruption is not always a bad thing. So consider a troll infiltrating a hate group online like Truth Social, Parler, or Twitter, or X, or whatever. And they go on to sow some discord and chaos to keep the group occupied with fighting with each other or chasing down troll conversations rather than successfully organizing to do horrible things like violently try to overthrow the government in an attempt to install an autocracy. That's not so bad and arguably a good thing. Obviously, that depends on which side you're on, but for me, that sounds like it's pretty good.
Yeah, the side of nonviolence is probably the right side to be on, generally speaking. So
I like that side, especially on World Vegan Day.
Right. Also consider a troll as a political dissident in an authoritarian country, and that someone is then able to sort of provoke powerful people into revealing their own corruption or their bigotry in a way that ultimately leads to some loss of power for these harmful leaders. It's like the only way that this person can safely defect from their authoritarian government is to sort of troll them online and get them to incriminate themselves. And again, that would be, I think, something that we'd probably consider generally in the positive direction.
Right. One of my favorite things there right now is I see there's this guy that's like linked to Trump's, like some of his trials and stuff. And every time he goes to do a public kind of announcement to the media or some kind of media scrim or something like that, there's this protester that shows up behind him with signs and just keeps blowing a whistle every time he tries to talk. Like every time he tries to talk, she just blows this whistle really loud. And he gets so annoyed on camera, and it just kind of exposes the kind of person he is every single time. It's just one of my favorite things that I've ever seen. So
that's pretty good. That's some trolling.
Disruptor for good.
Yeah.
It's very trolly. Like there's no comment. It's just literally blowing a whistle.
A literal whistleblower.
A literal whistleblower. Now, consider a troll that, by getting people distracted from their conversation, lowers the temperature of a group of groups who tend to kind of whip themselves up into a frenzy in their little echo chambers, but by being distracted, they lose focus of their primary rhetorical targets. So essentially, they kind of lose steam because they're focused on other things. That troll kind of helps dissipate that frenzy.
Exactly. Another one that is maybe a little dated at this point is Anonymous, which was, or maybe still is, a group of people who used some trolling strategies to expose some of the dark underbellies of groups like Scientology. That was one of their primary targets, where they would expose some of the things that they were doing in there, some of the things that they ended up getting in trouble for, the Scientologists did, or at least it was brought to light and then faced a lot of public scrutiny at the very least. Anonymous also antagonized the Westboro Baptist Church, and they actually went after a number of like overtly homophobic groups and organizations.
Yeah.
And they also trolled conspiracy theorists who picketed the Sandy Hook Elementary School victims, as well as like other people who were out there doing conspiracy things that were actually causing harm to people.
Right. So at one in-person protest, someone wearing an Anonymous associated Guy Fawkes mask was carrying a sign that said, "The corrupt fear us, the honest support us," which, probably pissed off a lot of people at that protest.
Yeah. So, and you can sort of see then where they were trying to come from there.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that Anonymous was a wholly good group and all of that, but I think they did take on sort of causes that were ultimately, I think, things that people saw as being sort of good.
Sure.
At least the direction that they went. There are people who are legitimately trying to engage whose behavior may look like trolling. So this is actually, again, another side of there's sort of some amount of innocence here. For people who just aren't really familiar with how to use the internet, they might be engaging or trying to engage while asking and doing a lot of things that look antagonistic, such as asking questions to which the answer seems very obvious to most and might even be readily available if you know where to look. So obviously, you're thinking about this, you might consider someone who's like maybe older coming to mind, and they just don't really get how to use a site, how to find the FAQs, how to appropriately comment on things. But also you have people who are just maybe very sheltered for some reason. They just didn't have an opportunity to engage with those, and then they get to for the first time. You might have people who speak a different language who don't really understand what they're doing, and they're trying to communicate, and they're maybe, again, seem like they're being trolly. And of course, there are people who have some kind of diagnosis, intellectual or mental disability or something, who don't really know how to engage with it. Or even just someone who, no matter how savvy you are, you might go onto a platform you're just not familiar with, and you might do a bunch of dumb things that you don't know that you're doing because you just aren't familiar with it yet. And so those things can kind of look like trolling when they kind of aren't being trolling, and there's like actual legitimate innocence there, if you will, just naivety.
Right.
So a thing to consider there, and not go after those people when that's, they're not actually engaging in bad faith. They just don't know how to do it yet.
I think maybe a hallmark or an indicator that somebody is trolling is like a continued feigning of naivety.
True.
Like, I think it's not like one question and that person going, oh, okay, thank you, and that's it. Right? That's not usually somebody who's trolling. Usually somebody who's trolling will continue to ask deeper and deeper questions that are like seemingly naive, but really just kind of egging you on.
Yeah.
There's also something to be said, too, about the difference between trolling and maybe like satire being a type of trolling that is supposed to kind of take aim at something.
Yeah.
And I think this is where we have to talk about a modest proposal, or a modest proposal for preventing the children of poor people from being a burden to their parents or country, and for making them beneficial to the public. If you're not familiar with this bit of work, a modest proposal, it's essentially just a pamphlet that tells people that, like, when you're starving, you can eat your kids. You can sell them for food, you can eat your kids. And it was really written as a satire to the heartlessness of wealthy people toward poor people at this time. If you're not familiar with it, you should go read it, because it is a really great example of like very straight-faced satire. So for people that it upsets, though, it could be considered trolling, or might be targeted as trolling, because it is trying to antagonize, like intentionally antagonize somebody. So by definition, it is trolling, but it is worth kind of unpacking satire versus trolling and what that looks like too.
Yeah, and a similar one which we've talked about kind of at great length, but we'll do again is the whole birds aren't real conspiracy, which was
my favorite.
Yeah, which was just making fun of conspiracy theories. It was making one that's completely ridiculous, easily falsifiable, and nevertheless pushing for it as if it were a real conspiracy to sort of show the silliness of conspiracies, and it did gain a little bit of legs itself.
Yeah,
but anyway, for the most part, I think most people knew that they were sort of in on the joke, and that was sort of another version of sort of satire and getting in a rise out of people. You might even make the case that the flying spaghetti monster was kind of a similar, I think, idea here.
Right.
It was the idea of like satirizing religion, generally speaking, and pointing out the sort of hypocrisy of it and all of that. And anyway, that's I think a sort of similar thing.
Well, and when you take those examples and you look at how they disrupt certain systems, like, if you look at Birds Aren't Real and you look at the interviews of people like that go on to interview for the organization and how absurd and ridiculous those interviews are, what you start to find is that news outlets and stuff will stop interviewing people who subscribe to a conspiracy theory because Birds Aren't Real folks make it so ridiculous to have them on.
Sure.
Or like the flying spaghetti monster, like that's an example of like disruptors going in and trolling lawmakers and really disrupting that system. So again, disruptors for good and kind of trolling in that space can actually lead to certain outcomes. And really the problem that we are trying to talk about here is when you have somebody online in a comment section that's just trying to piss you off. Like that's just a very different type of example, you know? Like there's almost like a line between like trolling, satire, and nonviolent protest.
Right.
And like all of those things they can look very similar depending on how you define it and what parts of it you look at.
Yeah. They'll often sort of use the same toolbox, but to different ends.
Right.
And for different reasons. And I think, as you said, the major distinction is between people who are just trying to sow chaos for the sake of sowing chaos. They don't really care who the target is. They don't really care necessarily about a cause. They are just trying to get people riled up because for them, they think it's funny.
Right.
And actually, that kind of leads to sort of why why people troll.
Right.
In general, as we have sort of alluded to, the goal is attention, attention, and attention.
Yep.
Trolls just want people to respond. They want them to react. They want them to engage. So that is the primary motivation for pretty much all trolling behavior.
Right.
There are obviously the more complex cases we've discussed, but when you're talking about trolling in general, it's attention, attention, attention.
Right. And sometimes it is a personal vendetta against someone or a group of someone's, and the intention is to make them angry as a form of retribution for some real or perceived slight or insult, which there's lots of examples of that out there. And sometimes trolls have an agenda or cause, such as disrupting the party of a political rival or an opposed political figure, and there are plenty of examples of that as well.
Yeah, and sometimes it's just people who aren't very good at social skills who find it amusing to get people all flustered, and that's kind of how they have some amount of social interaction, because they wouldn't have another platform where they would sort of get to engage with people, and all they really know is how to antagonize people.
Right.
And sometimes the trolling itself is the end goal. That's all they want, is to just be trolls, to be antagonistic, to get people fired up. That's just what they want.
So what does all this mean? It essentially means you'll hear the phrase, "don't feed the trolls." And essentially, this is true for any group that's trying to cause this kind of chaos. The most effective way to shut down a troll is to starve them of their most precious commodity, which is attention, and you should ignore them. That's why we don't hear a lot about groups like the Westboro Baptist Church as much as we used to. They used to get a lot of news coverage, and now they don't get nearly as much, because what they were doing was they were protesting soldiers' funerals and the funerals of LBGT folks. They were protesting those places just to get attention and drive up donations to their church. You're not getting a lot of that anymore because people have started to ignore them.
Other recommendations for managing trolls include establishing a policy for a site that can prevent or respond to trolling to eliminate it, hire someone to manage social media accounts, become familiar with the site and forum, whatever you're using, so you know how it works ahead of time, so you can know what to look out for and how to respond to it. Consider simply ignoring and not responding to provocative posts. And if you are going to respond, there's sort of a kill them with kindness thing here, which is do so with patience and poise and just don't get invested emotionally. Then they do have the suggestion that when all else fails, you can troll them back, which I feel like, going back to your example, the Westboro Baptist Church, which I believe is already got much more attention in this episode than they really deserve.
Right.
They were kind of doing trolly things, and Anonymous kind of trolled them back.
Right.
Successfully, I might add.
Right.
So there is probably a place for that.
And, there were counter protests that would troll them back. I believe the Foo Fighters set up their instruments on the back of a flatbed truck and got in between the Westboro Baptist folks and the actual event they were protesting and just played music at them until they dispersed.
Wow.
So there's ways to kind of combat this. But I think one thing I always kind of say too is maybe approach with the idea that somebody is probably trying to do something in good faith, because if you are kind of always approaching it with the assumption that somebody is trying to do something, maybe that person is naive, then you start picking up the pattern, then you can starve them of the attention.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the thing here. You don't want to kick people out of a group or kick people out of a conversation who are genuinely trying to engage, but they don't know how. But that is tough. You have to be able to kind of know what the balance and the triggers are and kind of see how much of, your own energy you're willing to put into that conversation, or how much patience you have for that type of interaction.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I think that sort of covers it all really well, is that sort of how to manage, how to deal with trolls, and also thinking about there are also you might actually specifically choose to support trolls when they're out doing those sort of things that we said, where they're going after Scientologists or they're going after these authoritarian leaders and that sort of thing. And we might look at that and be like, all right.
Right.
I'm not opposed necessarily. I'm not going to join them, but I also won't fight them on it.
Right.
Might be a position I would take at least. But anyway, speaking of not feeding the trolls, I'm warning you now that you're about to have to listen to ads, and you can choose how you would want to navigate that. But now you're at least armed with information.
Yes.
I'll be right back. If you're joining us for the first time, one thing we do is we like to recommend some things, and we're going to be doing that. But we also have a couple of interesting tidbits to get through, and then, and of course, our credits and all of those. So let's talk about those. One of the things to talk about here is patent trolls.
Yes. So patent trolls are people or companies or other entities that specifically exploit loopholes in the patent system to get money or stifle competition in the market, or both. I mean, one day maybe we'll do a whole episode on corporate espionage and sabotage and all that stuff, because that sounds like it'd probably be a little bit fun. And also, like, the examples out there are pretty wild. But this sounds like maybe a strategy that might be used in that space.
It has come up on the show multiple times, so there's probably room for it somewhere. And I do like the idea of sort of walking through a couple of case examples, if you will, to talk about corporate espionage, and I don't know, just getting into it would be fun.
Yeah.
So the way patent trolls work is what they might do is they might buy patents specifically so that they can sue people for infringing on those patents. And then they make money from the trial because they technically do have a legal claim to that patent.
Right.
And so they'll specifically buy existing patents, or they might even file for their own patents. They might even file false paperwork essentially for patents. They'll pursue infringement claims that they have no right to pursue, and they're doing so just to stifle competition. It'll slow down people who are out there trying to start up something. Or they might file or enforce a patent that they have no intention of using, again, just to block people from using it, or to, again, sue people who do try and use some version of it for patent infringement. So that's sort of a thing that patent trolls do.
I mean, clearly that is just not a great situation, right? Patent trolls are gross. Like other trolls, you can imagine there might be some setting where they can actually be doing some good, such as blocking some pseudoscience from reaching store shelves. So there is kind of like this spectrum where, like, it could work to benefit people, but most of the time people who are trolling are not working to benefit people. And I think that's kind of the ultimate hallmark, is that if it's not designed to move towards good, then it's probably going to be some type of trolling.
Any tool is just a tool. It can be used for good. It can be used for bad. It can be used for any sort of thing. It can be used for neutral.
Right.
And I think that the methods employed by trolls are tools, and most of the time they're being applied to cause harm, to do things that are not beneficial to anybody. But there are people who have turned those tools around and used them for good. There are also times when sometimes the tool is the problem. I think the messaging that is used on shows like Joe Rogan, that is used on the sort of alt-right conspiracy platforms, the tools that they tend to use are the problem.
Right.
They're fear-mongering, hate-filled rhetoric that is the problem. Like, the reason they're successful is because they frighten people into following them, and that method is the issue. Their message is also a problem, but the tool is part of the issue here. So anyway, I think in this case, and most tools are just neutral. They're tools that get used one way or another. And you can make the case that, like, we can't just say no more trolling forever, because trolling isn't always bad. Understanding why people do it is an important, I think, feature in understanding the circumstances under which you're likely to get trolling that's harmful versus trolling that actually ends up having a net positive.
I think so much of, and then probably like the end take-home point that I would make here, is that so much of the existence of trolling relies on interaction.
Yes.
And really, truly, that is the power of it. Like, people don't just troll because it, like, feels good. You know, like, it feels good in terms of, like, I do it, like, you know, kind of like when I bite my nails. Like, I don't bite my nails because some people react. I bite my nails because it feels good, right? And so the idea of trolling is not like a sensory thing. Like, it's very much so. It requires a transaction with another person, like a social transaction. So understanding that as like the core of trolling behavior, I engage in a social interaction, somebody responds to my trolling behavior, and there's kind of a give and take as that goes. If you can understand that, then you can alter the course of that trolling behavior, at least in relation to you. Yeah. And I think that's an important thing to remember.
I agree. I do. I really like that you compared trolling to biting your nails.
It was the first thing I thought of, because I was also biting my nails just like a few minutes ago. So I was like, oh yeah, I'm doing this thing already. So
that's great. I like it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, as I said, we have some fun things to recommend that are completely unrelated to trolling. But before I do that, I would like to ensure that I've pointed out that if you like this episode and you would like to support us in some way, one way that you can do that is by leaving us a rating and review, subscribing, picking up some merch, or of course you can go over and join us on Patreon with this wonderful group of people for whom we just rely on them to help us continue doing the thing that we do, and we appreciate them, and so we give them extra stuff. And that includes Mike M, Megan, Layla, Mike T, Justin, Kim, Joshua, Brad, Stephanie, Olivia, Brian, and Ashley. Thank you all so much. We appreciate you. You really do help us do the show.
Yes.
And you too, listener. I know there are lots of you out there. You could have your name read in that group. And if you don't want to have your name, you could give me something else to read. And whatever it is, I will say it. Although if it is offensive, I will also beep whatever part of it is offensive because, we're trying to be a family friendly show here.
Yeah. If you put your name in as Nickelback, we will definitely not say that.
Yeah, them's fighting words around here.
Uh-huh. We had to probably beep that. Justin, will you beep that? No, I'm just kidding. Don't beep that. It's fine.
Speaking of which, audio engineering and production from Justin. Our social media coordinator is Emma Wilson. Thank you so much for recording with me today, Shane, my co-host and other writing partner in crime on this show.
Yay.
Of course, thank you all of you for listening and joining us today. And if you would like to reach out to us to talk to us about trolling, you can email us directly. And if you haven't done that before, you should give it a shot. You can email us at info@wwdpodcast.com. You can also reach out to us on the social media platforms. We're on the normal ones, the not crazy places. They're all a little bit crazy, but the lesser crazy ones.
Yeah,
we're there, and we're happy to chat with you about those. And if you haven't been following along, we've been posting a lot more content to YouTube lately, so you can sort of find some of our stuff there if you're interested. And there's an opportunity to leave more comments that are hopefully not trolly comments, although I've been roped into a few of those in the not too distant past. Anyway, I think that's what I have to say before we get to recommendations. Is there anything that I missed or that you'd like to add before we recommend some things?
No, I think that covers it. I think you nailed it.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Recommendations.
I am recommending a TV series. It's actually been out for a while now. I'm just a little late to finishing it, which is often the case with me. If you've been listening to this, you may have heard that. This is on Netflix. It is Guillermo del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities. It is an 8-episode TV series. Every episode is a standalone story. Most of them are based, if not all of them, are based on short stories. All of them are sort of horror-ish themed. So if you're in sort of a spooky mood post-Halloween, you might go check that out. They're very different. So some of them are only like 25 or 30 minutes long. Some of them are well over an hour. You get a full span just depending on the complexity of the story. And I will warn a little bit, there is definitely some gross content in here. Very little nudity, a little bit of violence, a lot of various types of gore and bodily fluids.
Sure. Yuck.
And just monsters galore. So anyway, I've been really enjoying it. At this point, I'm only one episode out from being done with it, but I've so far been really impressed with the series. And so if you're into that kind of thing, I recommend going and checking out Guillermo del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities on Netflix.
Yay. I love it. I love Guillermo del Toro's stuff. He's the kind of horror fan that I always really appreciate because they just have such a deep love for it. They're not doing it for gross out. They have such a deep affinity for horror in all its forms.
Absolutely.
But he does so much cosmic horror stuff. It's so cool. All right. So my recommendation is a record that just came out. By the time you hear this, it's been out for a couple weeks, but it's Blink-182's new album, One More Time. Now, I will say that I am an unabashed Blink-182 fan. From the time that I discovered them,
100%.
I love every one of their records. Every one of their records is good. They all have their merits. Some are obviously better than others. So I will say that I'm coming into this with a bias. But I will say this is their reunion record with Tom back. It's after Mark has been diagnosed and treated for cancer and has come back from that. It's after Travis Barker has been in a plane crash and came back. There's all kinds of stuff that's happened to this band, these three guys. And so this album comes out and it's very heartfelt. It's a lot of fun. It just sounds like they're just having a really good time on this record. They're not writing music to be artsy. They're not writing music to be different or try to do it. They're really just having a lot of fun on it. And it feels like that throughout the entire album. And I haven't stopped listening to it since it came out. So strong recommend on that if you like Blink-182 and you want to kind of get a feel for maybe a little bit of old school Blink-182.
Yeah, well, and man, Blink-182 is old school. It was the first album came out in 1992, maybe something like that.
Yeah, they've been a band for 30 some years and they have so much music out. People don't realize how much music they have out in that time, but I think this is one of their best outings. I think it's great.
Yeah, I love that. And then obviously most people I think are familiar enough with Blink-182 that we don't need to specify this, but this is like very poppy. We recommend a lot of like metal and heavy music on here. Blink-182 is not that. They're
nope, not even close.
Very melodic, very poppy. Still, kind of have, they're playing instruments, so it has a punk like feel, which I guess that's the bar to entry anymore. To being punk is just that you actually play your own instrument.
It's a very pop punk record, and it's guitar music. If you like guitar music and you like pop punk, then it's what it sounds. I mean, it sounds like a Blink-182 album, 100%.
Great. All right, very good. Well, I think that is all that I have. Anything you'd like to add or that I have forgotten before we wrap this one up?
No, I think that covers it. Don't be a troll. Unless it's for good, whatever that means.
Troll for good, not for bad. That's perfect. I love that message. All right, great. Well, then, this is Abraham.
And this is Shane.
We're out.
See ya.
You've been listening to Why We Do What We Do. You can learn more about this and other episodes by going to www.wwdpodcast.com. Thanks for listening, and we hope you have an awesome day.